as I said earlier, excellencies, distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shay Gopal, and I'm the Special Representative to the UN for the International Organization of Employers. And on behalf of our partners, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and the UN Development Coordination Office, we are delighted to welcome you today to this important discussion on partnerships to build back better and achieve the SDGs. If I may start with an African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. In that spirit, we are really pleased today to launch our joint publication with CAS and DCO, UNDCO, a playbook for increasing collaboration between UN resident coordinators and employers federations. What is the playbook? It is a guide for resident coordinators, what we call RCs, and employers, filled with recommendations, best practices, considerations for collaboration, and their unique roles. It essentially introduces RCs to employers and employers to the RCs, promising for those to come together to really help on sustainable development. The playbook is based on nearly a year of dialogues, deep dives, a survey, discussions at global and regional levels, and the input from stakeholders and knowledge partners like the Global Compact. Together with governments and other stakeholders, the private sector and the RCs can form a powerful partnership for tackling systemic challenges on the ground. The private sector has a great deal to offer as a partner, and RCs in their newly empowered and impartial roles under the UN reform. Now, being a person and someone who has worked with both the private sector and the public sector, I can appreciate that diversity breeds creativity, innovation, and impact. While the two groups, public and private, may speak different languages, the UN with its endless acronyms and the private sector with their key performance indicators, KPIs. One thing that I do know, when these two groups come together, they can move mountains. We have an exciting program for all of you today, taking place very appropriately on the sidelines of the UN Partnership Forum. Joining us are distinguished colleagues and speakers from Indonesia to Seattle, spanning many time zones, evidence that we are a global family. But first, before I introduce the speakers, a few housekeeping points. Please note that there are interpretation services available in English and Spanish. And as you can see on the screen, at the bottom of the screen, you can press the button for the language you wish. We welcome your questions to the speakers, and we have the Q&A function. Speakers, we ask you to please turn off your camera during the panel, and please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Just so that everyone knows, this event will be recorded and will be shared widely after the event. So I am very pleased this morning to introduce our first speaker, who will be delivering welcoming remarks. IOE Secretary General, Roberto Suarez Santos. Roberto, you have the floor.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Shay. And I want to start also with some thanking words, important thanking words, I would say. Of course, to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and I see Gerald with us, but also to the UN family that is joining us. And I see many of our beloved resident coordinators, Christian, Salazar, but also the distinguished representative of the UN in Indonesia. And for us, the main point of this exchange is to learn better how we can be efficient. So let me also start thanking all the companies that are also joining us, but also our employers and business organizations that are really willing to engage better, engage in a much more efficient manner, also with the different institutions internationally, but especially with the UN family. The effort that we are making also thanks also to the Conrad Adenauer Foundation, aims precisely to help us, as Shay said before, to move mountains. Sometimes things that are difficult to achieve can be really achieved if we put all together the effort that is needed. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all this day to mark the launch of our playbook. As I said, this playbook aims to strengthen the collaboration between private sector with the UN family. Today's challenges required bold and collective action to implement systemic change. And in front of us, we have the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals. Time is running out, only 9 years left. And COVID-19 has presented a kind of, even I would say, very challenging scenario. In some cases, we could say also that it's a disaster scenario. And that's how we have been looking at that for a period. But now we have to look at the future also with a kind of hope. Because yes, it's true that we have new challenges, but we also have new opportunities. The opportunity to build more robust and sustainable social protection system, and we are working in IOE hard with that. Health services, and we have seen and we have witnessed during this pandemic how important it is to have an efficient partnership with the private sector to get out of the COVID pandemic. But definitely to build back better and also helping business. 20% of many small and medium companies are at the edge of disappearing in many areas of the world. So we need a proper business environment also to produce better, but also to provide decent jobs. The pandemic has shown us the importance of public-private collaboration, from vaccines, from production of PPEs to socio-economic recovery, and again, for quick recovery of decent jobs. We all agree that the private sector is a crucial partner, and that's a message that has been passing on. And may I use this word also, being digested, which is not always so easy within many national and international scenarios and platforms. But I want to underline and I want to stress that the private sector collaboration is not just about financing and funding, which is an important part, but it's about innovation. The fact that you have companies that are really strong, creating, providing new alternatives, ideas, gives also a different output. It's also about expertise, the skills that you can find in many of the profiles in the private sector. You will never find them just in an easy manner in other parts of society. It's about technologies. It's also about providing different perspectives, including SMEs. So again, we are very grateful to CAS for the support on this important work, and also to UNDECO for helping us to bring the UN and the private sector together. We look forward to a rich discussion today on how we can translate that into action, into commitments. And we are very determined to get that, because now is the time to act jointly. I don't want to take much time. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Roberto, for those inspiring, welcoming remarks. And now I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Valers, Deputy Secretary General and Head of European and International Cooperation at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Dr. Valers, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shea, for giving me the floor. Thank you very much, Secretary General Roberto Soares Santos, for your kind words as well with regard to the cooperation between the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and IOE. And I would like to thank as well your President Giuseppe, for the indeed excellent partnership we were able to establish over the course of the last years. And let me as well extend my thanks to the UN Development Coordination Office and Rosemarine Kalapurakal, and also please pass on our regards to UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed. Ladies and gentlemen, some of you might know the Konrad Adenauer Foundation is a political foundation, a foundation that is linked to the Christian Democratic Union, that is the party of our Chancellor Angela Merkel. We are publicly funded, and listening to all the participants around the globe, I kind of was reminded that we as well have a rather large network. We have 100 offices, more than 100 offices around the world. And we are working at the intersection of international politics, development, and public education. And of course, the development of the multilateral system of the UN is important to us, and we are accompanying this by our UN offices in New York, Geneva, and Nairobi. Now, talking about content, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation very much advocates a concept, an economic concept that is called social market economy. And I very much recall when I was representative of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Washington, that is 20 years ago. And when I was talking about this concept of social market economy, some of the people I was talking to thought that this has something to do with socialism. But this obviously is not the case. Quite the contrary. The concept was introduced by the then Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, the name we bear. And Konrad Adenauer, he was the first Chancellor or Prime Minister after the Second World War. And during that time, there was a fierce battle on how to orient our economy here in West Germany in that time. And Konrad Adenauer imposed this concept of social market economy. And that revolves around the partnership between government, employees, and employers. And this is something as well, we kind of put the base, this relationship for the wealth the social market economy could generate over decades here in Germany. And today, the concept is widely accepted. It even entered into the Treaty of the European Union. So for us, the private sector is playing an enormous role when it comes to development. And this is true as well when we are talking about the developing countries. For us, for the foundation, it is crucial that the private sector is engaged. And as Roberto said, not only with regard to investment, but as well to provide expertise, to provide innovation. We know that without the private sector, development is not possible. And this is why, me, myself as well, we are very proud that we could partner up with the IOE as well to this conference. And when I flipped through the playbook, I think the examples that are given prove very much that the private sector engagement goes well beyond funding opportunities or corporate social responsibility obligations. And I would like to encourage everybody that is as well associated to the IOE to go on with this wonderful work. We have a very impressive lineup of speakers, Shea. So I would like to thank you once again for giving me the floor, and I'm looking forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much from Berlin.
Thank you, Dr. Wallers. And we so much appreciate your support and the foundation's support. In fact, the work that we've done would not have been possible without your partnership. So now I will move on. I am honored to introduce now our keynote address, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, the UN Deputy Secretary General, who is sharing her message via video.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to join you in launching this playbook to strengthen collaboration between the United Nations Resident Coordinator Offices, our country teams, and employer and business organizations. I congratulate the International Organization of Employers and the Development Coordination Office for creating this new tool. The playbook's guidance and examples of best practice will help employers to engage with the UN and to find entry points for dialogue. This resource also offers United Nations representatives a better understanding of the strategic role of employers in advocating for change and in mobilizing assets and expertise in support of sustainable development. From social protection and gender equality to climate action, private sector advocacy, and leadership, this can all have a significant impact on policy decisions. COVID-19 has reminded us all how interdependent we are and how desperately we need to work together to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. Our joint efforts, including through the United Nations Global Compact, can help governments creating enabling policy environments for Sustainable Development Goals. For more than a century, the International Organization of Employers, alongside the International Labour Organization, has played a critical role in developing socioeconomic policies, international labour standards, and workplace solutions. Let's now build on that history. Let us strengthen our work together as we support and collaborate with governments to deliver on our promise to future generations, to build a world where no one is left behind.
We thank the Deputy Secretary General for her inspiring message and her continued support for this project. We look forward to deepening our engagement with the UN in trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So now we turn to today's main program featuring two interactive panels. And the first panel, I would like to introduce Andrea Ostermeyer de Souza, the Executive Director of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in the New York office, and she will be moderating our panel, our first panel. Andrea, the floor is for you.
Thanks, Shay. Dear panelists and participants, in our first panel today, we would like to learn how the still prevalent thinking and working in silos can be overcome. We often see that the UN might interact with government, perhaps with selected civil society actors, but when it comes to private sector cooperation, this collaboration is often limited to projects, or it focuses on the implication of bigger companies and less on federations or small and medium-sized enterprises. Business often gets reduced to a funding partner and is less often seen as a strategic ally with whom also advocacy work for appropriate policy frameworks could and should be done. However, first best practices are out there, and we would like to hear from our panelists what kind of takeaways can be derived from their own experiences. And it is my pleasure to first give the floor to Valérie Juillon, UN Resident Coordinator in Indonesia. Valérie, you have been working with the UN for more than 25 years, both in development and humanitarian assistance. Before you took up your current position, you have been Resident Coordinator in Nepal, and you worked also in similar positions in Honduras and Guatemala. In your role as UN Resident Coordinator in Indonesia, what are you doing to bring business and employer associations to the table to be partners in the strive to achieve the SDGs? And also drawing from your experience in previous postings, can you also share examples of inclusive collaboration with various stakeholders and the impact you had achieved? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you. I hope you can hear me and see me well. Good. I think I have 5 minutes, huh? That's it. So I have to keep my intervention short. First of all, I think, what I want to highlight, everybody knows it, but it's very important to understand that the SDG is not a UN agenda. It's everybody's agenda. It's the humanities agenda. But, I see the role of us, UN, in the field, in the countries. Our main objective is to help government achieve the SDGs, but not because it's nice, just because the achievement of the SDG, actually, it's the key to really fulfill the vision of the UN Charter. That is to say, to keep peace and give dignity to people. The SDGs exactly respond to that. So it means that it is an agenda that also pertains to the private sector. And also what everybody knows is that we need a whole of society approach to achieve the SDGs. So here there is absolutely no secret. It's a very simple formula. So I would say, what we need first in order to have this dialogue and this collaboration, the first component really falls on the government. We need a committed government. And for instance, in the case of the government of Indonesia, it is really committed to achieving the SDGs in the sense that it pushes the SDGs at all levels, in all instances. The SDGs are localized in Indonesia. They are owned by provinces, by districts, by villages. I mean, imagine we also have a village version of the SDGs. Planning is adjusted. Tools are in place to monitor, to track, to fund. We have an SDG dashboard at the level of the Ministry of Planning to follow on each indicator. So that's very important. Without the commitment of a government, there is very little that can be done. Then the second element that I want to highlight is the necessity for us to speak to each other and to listen to each other. We need to understand the points of departure, our respective constraints, also our specific culture. And here I want to highlight the importance of dialogue, both political dialogue as much as social dialogue, the political dialogue between different actors, government, private sector, but also the social dialogue that includes as well civil society. And this really helped in identifying the challenges, the difficulties, for instance, difficulties in social protection, in the labor market. And Amina Mohammed, in her introduction, was referring to the situation of COVID, how much it has revealed a number of challenges. And in that case, what we know by experience, we saw it in Indonesia, I saw it as well in Nepal during COVID time. The tripartite dialogue has been essential to really help government in identifying and prioritizing the effective and feasible measures. And this was only possible with this tripartite dialogue with all the actors that I mentioned. And it has also, I would say, the tripartite social dialogue has been helping businesses, for instance, to improve their preparedness for COVID-19. So it's really important. The third component is that we need a common agenda, a common objective. And this is where the SDGs come in. Because while the specific objective may differ, the final global one is the same. And what I want to highlight here is that I think the SDGs have brought an element that really makes the collaboration easy. Because I think that through the SDGs, the world has finally understood that for one side to win, it doesn't mean that the other side has to lose. Because the SDG really embody the very notion of win-win. And even better, I would say the win-win-win. Government wins, private sector wins, people win. And private sector and the EBMOs not only drive economic prosperity for a country, but they also provide and have the capacity to create decent job opportunity for the working population. And the private sector has the key for resources, technology, innovative ideas. And through the common agenda, I think we share common values. And one value that I want to highlight here that also Amina Mohammed touched upon is the value of leaving no one behind. And what does it mean? It means really prioritizing human rights, dignity, focusing on the most marginalized. So we have evolved, if you want, from a culture of everybody has its own interest to a culture where we all have the same interest ultimately because we all win through that interest. And I think the fourth component that is essential is that the UN must really play its role as an honest broker. The UN can bring the parties together and we can use all the specialized expertise we have at the level of the development system to support the search for solution. We have a toolbox. For instance, in Indonesia, we have been working with almost all the parts of the government at national and local level, with all the ministries and with the private sector. For instance, through the Indonesia Global Compact Network, the IGCN, we have been working on various issues. Take issue of business and human rights. We did that with UNDP and the IGCN. Business and child's rights with UNICEF, women empowerment with UN Women, water security with UNESCO, disaster risk reduction and preparedness with OCHA. And another example has been our engagement with APINDO. As one of the key constituents of ILO, APINDO has been engaging very closely with us in addressing issues like decent work, non-discriminatory workplace, industrial relationship, and creation of sustainable job. So during the pandemic, for instance, ILO and APINDO have been working very closely to address the impact of COVID in the business sector. So in sum, and I think I haven't gone beyond my 5 minutes, I would say there isn't let's say a secret formula to achieve that. It's just a very simple one. You need a committed and leading government. You need dialogue between public and private, a common agenda, and an honest broker, which is the UN. And I think that with that, we really have the good way of functioning. And this is what we have applied in Indonesia, because we are lucky in that we have the different parties that are involved and committed to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for highlighting these key ingredients for successful partnerships. And you also underlined the need for a committed government. And our next panelist brings in an executive perspective. And it is my pleasure to welcome Carmen Sánchez, President of the Agencia Nacional de Desarrollo in Uruguay, the National Development Agency. Carmen is an economist by training and paying also particular attention to entrepreneurial culture and the impact of medium-sized companies for economic growth. Carmen, your government has just received a grant from the joint SDG fund and set up a public-private partnership in order to support Uruguay's energy transition. How does your government engage with the private sector as a partner in sustainable development? Carmen.
Muchas gracias, Andrea. En primer lugar, agradecer a la Fundación CAS, a la OIE y por supuesto a Naciones Unidas por esta invitación a participar y por este tan importante panel que estamos compartiendo hoy. Efectivamente, como tú mencionabas, Uruguay se enfrenta en la segunda fase de transición energética a fuentes renovables, ya que tenemos el 98% de la matriz de fuentes renovables, pero ahora deberemos avanzar hacia la transición de los actores de transporte y de industria del país a la energía verde, proporcionando acceso a tecnologías limpias e innovadoras. Por lo tanto, desde el Poder Ejecutivo estamos muy entusiasmados con el apoyo recibido por los fondos ODS, que será sin duda un aporte para la promoción de esta segunda transición energética en Uruguay. Se trata de un instrumento innovador que potencia el alcance y profundiza el impacto de las políticas públicas que estamos llevando adelante, y creemos que será un impulso relevante para alcanzar los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible que desde el país nos hemos planteado. En referencia a la vinculación con el sector privado, no concebimos el desarrollo de un país o de una comunidad diseñado desde los escritorios de la torre ejecutiva en la capital del país. Sin duda necesitamos trabajar codo a codo con el sector privado para conocer sus demandas, para que se apropien de los instrumentos y para que nos puedan apoyar en la ejecución y no solo ser financiamiento de las iniciativas. La Agencia Nacional de Desarrollo, a la cual represento, es una agencia pública que trabaja fundamentalmente para el desarrollo de micro, pequeñas y medianas empresas y también en promocionar a los emprendedores. Y nosotros en nuestra conformación, además del directorio el cual presido, tenemos un consejo consultivo integrado por diferentes cámaras empresariales, desde la Asociación de Micro y Pequeñas Empresas, Cámara de Industria, Cámara de Comercio y Servicios, Cámara de Tecnología de la Información, en fin, también a la Asociación Rural de nuestro país, y todas estas empresas participan en el diseño de la planificación estratégica de la agencia, aportan insumos, son socios claves en la implementación de las actividades. Y desde ese ejemplo, desde el organismo rector de la agencia, tenemos una infinidad de otros ejemplos donde participa el sector privado, desde comités técnicos de selección de empresas beneficiarias, también en la red de instituciones que apoyan a los emprendedores en nuestro país, que lo integran más de 100 instituciones y la mayoría son privadas. Tenemos programas específicos que surgen a iniciativa del sector privado y desde donde del Poder Ejecutivo nos sumamos a estas iniciativas. Uruguay tiene una tradición importante de colaboración entre el sector privado y el sector público, y también la academia, que creemos sin duda que es un apoyo fundamental en muchos de estos instrumentos que podemos estar diseñando para cumplir los ODS. Así que desde nuestra experiencia, no solo es necesario, sino que es una realidad que en nuestro país trabajamos muy en conjunto con la sociedad privada, y también la pandemia nos ha demostrado esta posibilidad de cooperar con el sector privado en Uruguay desde el punto de vista ya sea de test o demás insumos sanitarios. El sector privado se ha puesto al hombro para colaborar y trabajar en conjunto con el gobierno, desde desarrollos de aplicaciones o software específicos para hacer el rastreo de las enfermedades de COVID. Es decir, tenemos una experiencia muy fructífera y pretendemos seguir trabajando y continuando en ese sentido. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Carmen. And it is encouraging to hear that your cooperation is not only limited to projects, but you also include stakeholders into the strategic planning processes. Thank you very much, Carmen. And with our next speaker, we are now turning our attention to the voices of the private sector. And first, Douglas Opio, Executive Director of the Uganda Employers Federation, will share his experiences in relation to the interaction with the UN on the ground. Douglas, the Federation of Ugandan Employers is an important stakeholder in your country. Last year, you celebrated your 60th anniversary and you have over 617 members. How have you cooperated with the UN so far in relation to the realization of the SDGs, and what have been key results?
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's such a pleasure, and thank you to IOE and CAST for this invitation. In Uganda, we have been working with the UN for a long time, ever since we were basically established. But I just want to highlight a few lessons from our work. The first one is alignment to Agenda 2030 is critical. And this was also mentioned by the first panelist. But not an alignment with Agenda 2030, but alignment with also national priorities. In the case of Uganda, alignment to our National Development Plan 3, and then also our Vision 2040. So to have a proper engagement with a more global agenda in place, that's important. Secondly, this is the issue of dialogue, which has also been highlighted. For us, social dialogue is critical. So to have a dialogue framework that allows structured engagement on a continuous basis, as opposed to activity-based or project-based kind of engagement, is critical, so that results can be tracked over time and targets are agreed together in a collective manner. Thirdly, very critical, what we have learned is the issue of goodwill. In as much as we have specific interests given the different constituencies that we represent, we shouldn't lose focus of the bigger goal, which is no one left behind. So irrespective of what we aspire, what we want to achieve for our constituencies, we should never forget that. So those are some of the lessons we have learned. And out of that, we have been able to get some results. I just want to highlight 3 specific ones. The first one is the launch of the Women Empowerment Principles in Uganda. That was in 2016 in collaboration with UN Women. That was critical for us. And ever since then, we have been documenting good practices from the employers. So annually, we meet and take stock, have dialogue again, have speakers from companies sharing their experiences of how they're promoting gender equality in the world of work. Secondly, we have been using the same approach, dialogue, for us to be able to develop the Decent Work Country program, so that we promote and drive this agenda of decent work as a tripartite. The tripartite structure has worked quite well as a result of that engagement. And then lastly, not least, the development of the National Action Plan on the elimination of child labor, which fortunately for us was just launched on the Labor Day, the other day by the president, but it's beyond just us working with the ILO, for instance, but also working with UNDP, the Resident Coordinator's Office. So those are some of the results I can highlight, but I can tell you there's a lot more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Douglas, for sharing your experiences and also highlighting that there is a need for a structured framework of dialogue. It should not be left to ad hoc meetings and exchanges. With this in mind, I would like also to move on now to our fourth panelist, to Zeynep Özbil, Director of Global Communications at Untitled Koç Group in Turkey. Zeynep knows both worlds. She has worked for the UN, she has worked for the World Bank. So what are some of the projects where your company, your holding company, have engaged with the UN over the last years? And what have been also challenges in working with the UN and international organizations? What have you encountered?
Thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Henry Ford once said, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. I think this pretty much sums up our journey working with the UN for the SDGs over the course of the last couple of years. I guess we can all agree that the issues we face today cannot be solved by one nation or one organization alone. So partnership has really been key. And at Koç Group and at Arçelik, we are committed to the SDGs and see UN as a critical partner in our ambition to create social and environmental value. Koç Group, as some of you might know, is one of the key industrial players in the world, and through its commitment to inclusivity and equality, the company has long been a UN ally on different platforms and projects. For example, in 2015, Koç became one of the global impact leaders of the He4She movement to battle gender inequality. And around 30 group companies, including my own Arçelik, have signed the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. At Koç, we strive to build an inclusive communication strategy that reflects our commitment to equality. And training communications and marketing teams is a key element of that, because communications has a huge impact in everything that we do. When I look at the corporation as a whole, I see that Koç brands in different sectors have all led initiatives on gender equality to reach this objective in the SDGs. For instance, in automotive, when I look at that sector, special programs targeting low female employment numbers, in addition to setting quotas, widespread gender equality trainings aim to change not only the numbers, but also the minds. Arçelik is no exception in that regard, and we conduct programs and projects to disseminate the idea of gender equality among all our employees to increase awareness in this area. And most recently, last March, 2 months ago, really, we partnered with UN Women for our Equalize with Arçelik Summit, which is essentially an effort to bring together both private and public players to the table to address gender inequality. A new women's empowerment program, which aims to increase the number of women in production, engineering, and R&D, usually underrepresented, was also introduced during this program. And it will effectively train and repurpose existing female staff to these areas. It's really an effort to bring positive change in line with UN's Sustainable Development Framework and partner with a number of UN organizations on different projects and programs. And we don't do this alone. Another example of our partnership has been with UNICEF, which is different than the one I just mentioned on awareness raising and bringing people together. In 2018, our lead international brand, Beko, launched a program with UNICEF as part of Beko's Eat Like a Pro campaign, addressing childhood obesity across the world. This was a digital campaign and programmatic funding through which we raised about €1 million for UNICEF to use that resource to implement a program designed to improve the eating habits of 600,000 primary school-age children in Latin America. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we believe in partnership, and that partnership sometimes takes the form of using each other's platforms, sometimes on events to raise awareness, and sometimes in designing programs together using each other's expertise. Obviously, practice makes perfect, and the more we work together, the more we understand what we each bring to the table and how we work and what our limitations are. And there, I think open communication, as mentioned by previous speakers, has been key. An exchange of expertise and information is really critical to a successful partnership.
Thank you very much, Zainab, for these very encouraging examples of successful private public partnerships and working with UN agencies. I would like now to go into our second round of discussion and also open a little bit the scope of discussion with questions from the audience. And Valerie, we heard that these kind of frameworks for cooperation are very important. To what extent have you established such a structured framework for exchange with the private sector, with business association? And how do you bring in APindo, the Federation of Employers in Indonesia? How do you bring APindo into also assessments and planning processes that you have going on?
Thank you very much, and for this follow-up question. First of all, I need to say that the reform that has taken place within the UN development system has made two important changes. First of all, it has really established the UN Development Cooperation Framework, Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, UNSDCF, as the key document that underpins really everything at country level. And it's very important because once we have a document that really is can federate everybody and everything, it is essential. And the second point is also the empowerment of resident coordinators, in the sense that it has strengthened our role. It means that we can call on all the UN development system parties to bring the support, to bring expertise. So I would say, when you ask what have we done to bring APindo and others at the table, I think the key is really in recognizing that those partners are not pick and choose, in the sense that you don't get them at the table only when you need their voice to tick the box. You need to involve those partners, business and employers association, at every step of the way of the work you do. So first, you bring them in when you identify the issues, the problems, and the challenges. That is to say, at the time we prepare our common country analysis, then we have included them. We consulted with them, we talked to them. Because as a matter of fact, while we, UN, bring a framework of analysis, those who know better what the challenges and the problems are the people in the country, government, non-government entity, private sector, civil society. So we bring them at that stage of identifying problems, because this is their voice, their problems, their issues that we need to factor in, not our reading of it. Secondly, we also bring them in at the time we define our intervention. So it's not enough to have them when we identify the problem. It's also in defining our intervention. Because at the end of the day, we as UN, we work at different levels. Of course, we work at the policy formulation, but we also work with the people. But the big part of the work is not done by us. It's done by the companies and businesses in the country. It's done by the people themselves. So when we define our intervention, we need to have those who really do the work, who will really change something. And actually, if they change, everything will change, not only if we change as UN. Third, I think it's very important to recognize that the UN has a convening power. And why do we have this convening power? It's mostly because we have no vested interest in anything. You know, we are not there to get a bigger capital. The only thing that we bring is actually not only the expertise of the specialized agencies, but the normative framework. And that normative framework is essential to frame exactly that, the discussion. The previous speaker has been making a lot of reference to women's rights and women empowerment. And I must say, it's so essential. With our normative framework, we guide the discussion, as I say, with no vested interest, but the interest of the women in the country, the indigenous groups in the country, the marginalized people in the country, as well as, for instance, the private sector. And what the EBMOs bring as well. They bring the voice of the big, small, medium, micro enterprises. And they are all actors. So I would say our convening power is really essential to have all this. And the fourth element is that we also involve the partners and private sector in the implementation. And in that sense, it's to really work with them directly and really implement. We have multiple examples. I mentioned in my first intervention the work that we have been doing on business and human rights, on water security, on disaster management, on decent work. The most recent example that I can mention, it's an agreement that was signed now between FAO, Microsoft, and the Ministry of Agriculture to advance the digitalization of the sector, where we built a new digital platform that will link the ministry with the farmers across the country. You know, and FAO has helped the ministry in developing its e-strategy. So all those elements are important. And when it comes to our engagement with Apindo, as I said, we work on decent work, on non-discriminatory workplace. So this is the way we have been doing. I stop here because I think I've passed my time, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie, very much. That these are excellent examples where I think a lot of our participants can take from. One question from the audience is going into the kind of support rendered for small and medium-sized enterprises, and particularly for startups, because quite often they are lacking the financial basis, and particularly in times of crisis. What kind of support do they receive? And I would like to perhaps hand over this question first to Carmen to see a little bit what you are doing actually to boost small and medium-sized enterprises, which are quite often the backbone of economies.
The question is to me or is to
Sí, efectivamente, Andrea, como tú mencionabas, Andrea, efectivamente en Uruguay las pymes representan el 99% de las empresas de nuestro país, con lo cual vaya si son importantes, y en este año particularmente de pandemia, el gobierno ha puesto la política pública de promoción de las pymes en el centro de la política económica, porque son sin duda las que más se han afectado. Hemos desarrollado una serie de instrumentos que tienen que ver fundamentalmente con aportar liquidez a las empresas a través de créditos, subsidios, fondos no reembolsables, ampliación de nuestra línea del sistema de garantías. Hubo una batería muy importante de medidas, por supuesto todo lo que tiene que ver con exoneraciones de aportes a la seguridad social, exoneraciones a la Dirección General Impositiva. Realmente centramos en las pymes todo lo que tiene que ver el apoyo de la política económica en un año tan complejo, y bueno, y muchos de estos instrumentos se mantienen, por supuesto, en este 2021, donde la pandemia continúa pegándonos muy fuerte todavía, y tenemos una serie de programas para startups, como mencionaban y como se preguntaba, justamente enfocados a poder aportar ese primer capital, ese capital semilla que necesitan muchos emprendedores a la hora de comenzar con su negocio, y que a veces no es tan sencillo conseguirlo en el sector privado, en la banca tradicional.
Thank you very much, Carmen. We have another question that goes a little bit more into the strategic level, and perhaps, Douglas, as you mentioned, also the kind of need for a framework of exchange and dialogue. Perhaps you can look into that. Our participant asked to what extent can the private sector also contribute to the UN cooperation frameworks, and what kind of modalities have to be there?
Thank you so much. First, just to respond directly to your question, in Uganda, we were extensively involved in the UN, the Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. And the approach that was used here was mainly organizing the constituents through the ILO. So the UN worked through the ILO to mobilize us within the private sector, and then us, based on our convening power, we mobilize the broader private sector, which is our membership, and then through us, we are able to make the input within the discussions for the current framework running till 2025. So that's basically the approach that has been used.
Excellent, Douglas. Thank you. And perhaps we have a couple of minutes left. A last question also to Zeynep. In your presentation of what also Koç Group is doing, it's a strong partnership that you have established with UN agencies. And I think it could be interesting also for our audience to see at what point do you bring also a cooperation with government in? So to make it really this kind of tripartite engagement. Do you have any experiences to share on that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously working with UN has been a long journey for the group overall. Depending on the kind of projects that we're engaging, for example, if it's an educational project, we would certainly at least inform at some point the ministries, the relevant ministries on that. And in some cases, we would work very jointly with the ministries designing the projects. Currently, in my company, there are no active projects where we're working with the governments, with the ministries of education or environment, that we're working with the UN at the same time. But sometimes it's not a tripartite partnership, but more bilateral. Usually when we're working with the UN, it's more of our more international scoped projects. We're doing business in a number of countries. For example, the UNICEF project I mentioned included a group of countries in Latin America. So we were not in direct contact with the governments there, but we did that through UNICEF partnership. And sometimes we take our social development or environmental projects more locally. And in those cases, instead of working with the UN, sometimes we go directly to the related ministry.
Okay, thank you, Zeynep. There is one question from the audience, which I think probably Valerie is the best one placed on our panel to answer. Can the UN and IOE work together to formulate a UN private sector engagement guideline, which should be a common policy work, highlighting also then the mechanisms, the responsibilities of parties in setting up an effective partnership for all? I know this is certainly the kind of best case scenario IOE would like to achieve, but how feasible is it in the UN context? Would it make sense also considering the diverse environment we are maneuvering in, and where could be the bottlenecks also within the UN system?
Thank you. Well, I think that, we have already somewhat a certain framework because when the UN developed the Global Compact, it was with this in mind, to have a mechanism and a framework for the collaboration between private sector and the UN. So I would say certainly what we have established with the Global Compact can be further enhanced while looking at all the inputs that IOE could bring in. But I think we have already, with the Global Compact, a very good basis to start. Because at the end of the day, what made this partnership essential, once again, is that it's a win-win situation where, for instance, I would say, when we collaborate with the EBMOs, as we call them, they bring a lot of information and data that help us in designing better strategy. And we bring, as I said in my previous intervention, we bring some norms, some values, some framework that really help in setting the stage. They bring the experience from the different layers of intervention at private level, and we bring the capacity to analyze it and extract from it. And with the Global Compact, what we have been doing, for instance, a lot, it's really a work on policies, on rights, on empowerment. And I think it was essential because if we don't have a framework of rights, we will not achieve something different. And you see, when I mentioned the leaving no one behind and the fact that we have a common agenda with the SDGs, the leaving no one behind brings a set of values that is really essential for the work we do together. Because if we don't have a common set of values, then we can't be partners. And I think with the SDGs, we have defined that, as I say, it's prosperity for all. It's the respect of the rights of for instance, the employees. And this is what the Global Compact is all about. It's to respect the transparency, to respect labor's right, to do no damage to the planet. So all these are layers of norms and values and principles that determine and help the coalition. So I would say IOE can certainly bring into that conversation additional elements that will enrich our modus operandi. But I think we have already a good basis with the Global Compact.
Thank you very much, Valerie, and a very warm thank you to all our panelists. I think your contributions have been really enriching and I think also giving a lot of ideas to our participants. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your expertise, and your time with us. And I'm handing over now to Shay for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to the panelists. It was an excellent conversation. And it fits very nicely into our next group who is coming up. And I'd just like to say, from the question of the SMEs to the role of Employers Federation being so critical because of their role in setting policy, legislation, regulation at the country level, that in order to reach the SDGs, as so many are saying, we really need them at the table. So it's very, very timely that we go into our next panel, where we're going to be also picking up some of those same themes about financing, the importance of the private sector and technology, innovation. So I'm going to introduce Lisa Courbiel, the head of the UN Joint SDG Fund, and she will be introducing the second panel. So Lisa, the floor is yours.
Shay, thank you so much, and congratulations to IOE for organizing the event with DCO. Really a pleasure to be here with the esteemed panelists for the discussion that starts to link leaving no one behind to building back better. The fact that we're not together in a conference room, the fact that we're all working virtually still in May 2021 underlines the task in front of so many of us to really enable and to protect those that are most vulnerable. So really delighted to start to shift how, reskilling, how creating more jobs, how looking at the informal sector, looking at the dearth of social protection systems, how all of that, those challenges in front of us face both governments, they face employers, they face the United Nations, and how can we all really align to build back better. I'm thrilled to be here as head of the Joint SDG Fund, which actually is a mechanism that was able to pivot during COVID-19 to support social protection systems in over 35 countries. Our 70 million was able to leverage 40 to 50 additional $1 million to really ensure that we could be looking at feasibility studies and the actual data and analysis that can empower governments to expand social protection measures. And I think that's really part of the questions that I'm really excited to talk about today. We have so many best practices. So part of this is really going to each of our panelists and learning a little bit about the best practices and the targets they have for this year. So without further ado, I'm delighted to begin with Ambassador Luigi Mattiolo. Ambassador Mattiolo is the G20 Sherpa and advisor to the Prime Minister of the Government of Italy. So Ambassador, good morning and welcome. Ambassador, your first question is regarding your role leading the G20 during the COVID-19 outbreak and recovery. And could you please outline some of the priorities for the G20 this year to ensure that no one is left behind? I'm afraid you're still on mute, Ambassador.
Can you hear me now?
Beautifully, beautifully.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Grazie.
The pleasures of smart working. Sorry for that. So thanks again to all of you for inviting me. Let me say, first of all, that Italy as a G20 presidency this year is aiming to catalyze a multilateral effort towards a sustainable and inclusive economic recovery through three main thematic pillars: people, planet, and prosperity. And health remains as a sort of a cross-cutting issue across the three of them. What does it mean? This means putting people at the center of all our efforts, ensuring that we shape a fairer, more prosperous future for our citizens and for our societies. To do so, G20 members need to give a determined, a committed, a firm response to the health crisis, but also to firmly address its socioeconomic impact and consequences. COVID-19 affects each country individually, but also collectively, I would say. It has been a real stress test for our capacity to come together with mixed results, especially in the early phase of the pandemic. The G20 moved swiftly to suspend debt treatments and create mechanisms to enhance research collaboration and to roll out the rollout of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostic tools. But there is much more work to be done. Let's be frank, and an important funding gap has still to be filled. The Italian G20 presidency has been working intensively on this, and we have achieved already some important results, thanks also to the constructive dialogue we engaged with the private sector. In early April, as you may know, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors made headway on key issues such as the renewal of the DSSI, the common framework for debt treatments, and the potential allocation of new SDRs in favor of the most vulnerable countries. The G20 response to COVID has led to the establishment of the ACT Accelerator, which has received a strong support from our countries, in particular in favor of vaccine distribution through its COVAX facility. This is a key priority for Italy, in line with our focus on ensuring that vaccines are considered to be a global public good, which means they have to be made readily available to all according to agreed and transparent mechanisms. This is obviously an humanitarian imperative, coupled also with a strategic concern. Given the risk of variants, mutations of the virus, we cannot forget that no one is safe until everyone is safe, and that international cooperation and solidarity are the only way to address this global threat. Italy is also promoting a broad adoption of what we used to call One Health approach. We can crucially improve resilience and prevention of health crises. These issues will be very soon addressed at the Global Health Summit that President Mario Draghi will be co-hosting and co-chairing with the President von der Leyen later this month on the 21st. Our people-centered action implies also focusing on what I would say are the cascading effects of the pandemic. The ongoing crisis has affected the economies and labor market across the globe, depriving millions of their livelihoods and restraining access to culture and education. It has exposed and sometimes exacerbated already existing inequalities within and between our countries. This is why we place a particular emphasis on supporting those groups hardest by the pandemic, particularly youth, women, and precarious workers. We are also working on increasing the resilience of micro, small, and medium businesses worldwide, and on helping them participate in the global supply chains. We have also scaled up the attention given to the pressing problem of uneven economic development between nations through a number of approaches interconnected among them. This includes work on food security, on the role of intermediary cities, sustainability, debt, resilient infrastructures, with a strong focus on achieving the SDGs, which remain the guiding light for all G20 action on these issues. So I hope that, although briefly, I gave, this is not only a list of priority, but I want to see also an idea about how they are interconnected, since the threat and the risk are equally interconnected. I thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so very much. Indeed, the leadership of the G20 is well presented here, and I think the range of issues is a perfect segue to our regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm delighted to introduce Christian Salazar, who is, of course, representing all of those countries as regional director for the UN Development Coordination Office, and certainly is sort of on the front lines, if you will, battling so many of these issues. Christian, welcome and good morning. So your first question is regarding to how you've been on those front lines of bringing employers to the table at the UN in Latin America. Have you seen any opportunities, any positive changes in this collaboration? And if you could share any examples with the audience of how this might be an example of best practices for other regions. Many thanks.
Well, many thanks, Lisa, and Shea, Roberto, and everybody. Hi, good morning. Pleasure. Thanks for having me here. Let me just start by saying that the operation environment to advance Agenda 2030 in Latin America and the Caribbean has changed dramatically. I mean, just now, a few days ago, The Economist reported that LAC's economy shrank by 7% last year. This is more than double in the world average. 2.7 million businesses have closed during the pandemic. The number of job seekers has increased to over 30 million. We're talking here only formal sector, and you know many economies have a very, very large informal sector. So our Economic Commission for Latin America, ECLAC, and the Caribbean has projected the largest recession in 120 years coming, significant slide back into poverty, and a possible stagnation or regression of many SDGs. So the challenging we're facing to advance Agenda 2030 in this region are huge, and a crisis of this magnitude cannot be solved very obviously by governments alone. It needs all hands on deck. It needs all stakeholders to stand together. It needs a broad-based social and political consensus about the way forward, and the private sector is an essential player in this endeavor. So this unprecedented impact of the pandemic in this region means that decision makers cannot stay in their traditional comfort zones or guide their decisions by well-known, well-loved, long-held beliefs. So the current crisis, in fact, is bringing about openings for social and political dialogue in many countries, including the private sector, about the way forward and about what to do with this whole difficult situation. So the UN, as Valerie has also pointed out for Asia, we can and are playing an important role in generating this dialogue around the response, the recovery, and the future of sustainable development, because the UN has this credibility, this impartiality, and this convening power. And especially this is important in politically polarized environment, of which we have quite a few in our region. So we teamed up basically to foster the dialogue exchange between the UN and the private sector. My office, the Development Coordination Office for Latin America, Caribbean, worked with IOE and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, closely collaborating with ILO. It's very important for us to have ILO closely on the side on these type of endeavors. And we organized 2 strategic dialogues between the business associations of the region, senior executives of larger companies, and their UN resident coordinators here. That's the advantage of the teleworking, because you can put these things together much quicker and much easier than, you know, when you have to organize a big presential conference, and all of these kind of high-level executives are now kind of working around calendars for teleworking. So we could put this together. These encounters focused on the role of the private sector in the socio-economic response and recovery and on social protection, and came up with a number of shared policy recommendations on social protection and a call to business associations and resident coordinators to conduct similar dialogues in their countries. In our region, we have many very good examples for years now of collaboration and dialogue between the private sector, UN. So we're not starting from zero at all. And one example, for example, is in Colombia, where the UN-led business call to action supported the development of a tool to analyze data on private sector contributions to the SDG, and through joint work supports the Colombian government to develop an integrated national financing framework for Agenda 2030. It's really too early to assess the impact of these and other initiatives. As I said, there are many others, but I'm convinced that in this very difficult moment in time, high-level dialogues at regional level, combined with a close interaction between the UN and the private sector at country level, are contributing to an atmosphere of collaboration, which helps societies finding consensus about the best way out of the crisis and into a better future towards a sustainable development path that is prosperous, green, and socially just. So that's what I have to bring you in the short period of time given, because of course, you know, we have really in this region very many good examples of collaboration of the UN with the private sector. Back to you, Lisa.
Excellent, Christian. Thank you so much. And again, we always value the reality of what's happening in the field, where the real issues are presented so vividly. So thank you for that insight, and we'll hopefully loop back for more time also. Our next panelist is Mr. John Frank, who is Vice President of UN Affairs at Microsoft. Welcome very much to the panel. And John, we all know that Microsoft has a global footprint and is present in almost all countries throughout the world. So could you please share with us some of the innovative partnerships where Microsoft is engaged with the UN, with employers, other stakeholders in tackling social challenges and the SDGs? Thank you. Over to you.
A year ago, we created a UN Affairs office in New York as precisely to focus all our many engagements around the world with the UN agencies. So we have a team in New York as well as Geneva and Seattle working to sort of across Microsoft on these initiatives with the different teams within Microsoft who are more deeply engaged. As we think about growing the economy back, one has to recognize that, at least in the United States and Europe, the percentage of economy, the percentage of GDP that is going to be digital technology over this decade is going to grow from 5% to 10%. It's just an incredibly important part of the economy. And so it becomes even more essential that we address the digital divide. And so we've been very focused on how do we create multi-stakeholder initiatives that will help advance closing the digital divide. And the digital divide exists everywhere. You know, New York City, you know, we found that when children moved to online schools, there were many children that didn't have access to broadband to be able to participate. And of course, half the world isn't even under the coverage maps for access. So we've been trying to work with a group of others to listen and understand and participate in a discussion about what does it take to address the digital divide. And we come up with kind of three broad categories. The first is the connectivity piece, which is traditionally what people have focused on. And there, what we haven't done a great job on is enough focus on affordability. People are covered by GSM, but they can't afford it. And we need to find affordable solutions and affordable devices for people. You know, we've worked to create some technology that we call TV white space, which is using essentially super Wi-Fi using the radio frequencies that would be between television channels. And so whereas a Wi-Fi may be able to reach 15 meters, super Wi-Fi, this TV white space facility, can reach 15 kilometers and can provide broadband access at a much lower capital cost for a lot of people. And so it was originally, we deployed it in Kenya, but just this week or last week, we had the first full-scale deployments in Ireland, and other we've deployed it in the U.S. as well. We actually don't deploy it. I should just be correct. I mean, we make the technology available for free. People can deploy it, and it's just one of many solutions. But we need to be looking at lower cost solutions. Low Earth orbiting satellites, over the next few years will become more common, and they may provide a great solution. But we need to focus on affordability. The second piece is usage. Do we have equitable and effective usage? And right now, our coverage maps show that everybody has access, but in fact, people are not using it. And focus on usage, not coverage, as the measure of success will be incredibly important. Now, as we look at, and just, I guess with this audience, just particularly mention, countries have to ask for affordable solutions, and we need to get regional development banks to fund it. Latin America has actually been more, I think, probably most successful at getting funding to take these projects to scale. But in Africa, there are certainly groups that are, are experienced in this and ready to go to scale. We need to get regional bank funding. Secondly, people need to have digital skills and literacy, because otherwise this just doesn't work. I mean, theoretical coverage is one thing. So we've been partnering with governments to focus on job skills and digital literacy. And so, we've had set a goal of originally 25 million people around the world that we wanted to touch with digital skills, with a minimum of 10 hours, but sometimes like 18 months of skills training. And we've now upped that to 40 million people. Again, it's a partnership model. I think one of the things we've learned is that for our skills training programs to be successful, we know a certain curriculum, and we can create a learning platform that's good for low bandwidth, offline, online. But for it to be sustainable, governments need to be supportive of it. And so that's what we've been working at really around the world. And so it's the government, it's a nonprofit partner, and it's Microsoft. And so those skills training programs are incredibly important as we go forward. So I think as there's this sense that we all agree the digital divide is important to address. And we need to sort of line up all of the steps to get people there. Last week, the President of the General Assembly held a high-level thematic debate on connectivity digital divide. And for that, the World Wide Web Foundation, with our assistance, sponsored a multi-stakeholder statement saying that we need to pull these things together. It's a short statement. I'll put it in the chat window. But we've got about 40 leading people in this area who are the initial signatories. It'll grow, but from Achim Steiner, UNDP, to Cecilia Bonfeld, who's the director of Digital Europe, to the president of the International Chamber of Commerce, a mix of government and business, because we've got the capability to address the digital divide. We can do it less expensively, but it does require kind of multi-stakeholder action to get it done. So I'd like to say we do have the capacity. It's incredibly important for the economic cohesion that we close the digital divide.
Thank you so much, John. Really exciting to hear all of the efforts underway and how Microsoft is contributing on such critical issues. When I think of connectivity and skills base, I think of the current engagement we've had at the Joint SDG Fund for the Small Island Developing States, and we engaged resident coordinators around the world. Those themes came across again and again. You know, when you're looking at some of the emerging issues, I mean, if you're not connected, you're really at risk of being left behind. And I think that was something you underlined very, very well and succinctly. So thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our next panelist, our final panelist, which is Ms. Stephanie Fingal. Ms. Fingal is the CEO of the Employers Consultative Association of Trinidad and Tobago. So Stephanie, you're most welcome. And the first question to you is, why do you think employer federations are uniquely positioned to assist in meeting the many social challenges that are including achieving the SDGs? So broad question, over to you. Thank you. And I think you're still on mute, Stephanie. We can't hear you quite yet.
My apologies. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us with you this morning. For those who don't know, Trinidad and Tobago is a very small island out in the Caribbean, closer to Venezuela and then to the US. So we are the Employers Consultative Association, and I'm the interim CEO as mentioned. And why do we think that it is? Could you just repeat that question once more? Why do we?
Yeah, of course. How are you as an employer federation uniquely positioned to help with these social challenges?
Yes, and how are we uniquely positioned? So I'll give you a little quick synopsis because we have time constraints. When the pandemic started out in the world, in the wider world, in China and so, we as an employer organization, we started to listen and be aware of what was happening outside and quickly decided to write our proposals and so for attention by the government. And so that has been our modus operandi. Our approach has been always to look at what is happening, look at the high agenda items, things that will directly impact our society. And we do a lot of lobbying through writing to the Ministry of Labor, the different departments, planning and so. We also engage a lot in consultancies with international consultants hired by the UN, by the ILO, and we make our very candid contributions through these means. We also directly consulted in changing in legislation, in the labor environment and things like that in Trinidad and Tobago. And indeed, I would say when the pandemic came, a lot of our proposals, particularly for SMEs, our organizations deal a lot with SMEs, we represent them mainly. We were able to have a number of our recommendations introduced and supported by the government and even by some of the private agencies, for instance, accommodations by the banks and so. So as an employer organization, we have about 600 members in our organization. But of course, we also serve employers throughout the country. We are also able, and through the ILO, we have great support through the ILO in engaging with unions. And of course, you know, unions impact workers and workers are part of society. So employer organizations that really collaborate, if we, in our case with the ILO and with the labor unions, we are also on tripartite councils. There is the opportunity to impact government and to help the society, you know, in maintaining sustainable development. A problem we have, however, is the limited knowledge among a number of our employers, as well as the average man in the street about the SDGs. And we have raised this again through our own consultations with the Ministry of Planning in our country, with the ILO, through the UN. And I believe they have started in a number of cases to really, you know, spread the news and to educate our population. So we understand that from where we sit, we are, through our employers, we know the crises, we know the difficulties that employees experience and even employers in managing those crises. So we are well positioned and we take it up seriously. And we have a very democratic environment here where we are indeed invited to help revise legislation, as I said, and to even formulate legislation, and to even have some of our members sit on national boards. So our National Insurance, our Social Services Board, our Accreditation Council, our National Training Agency, and a number of other important boards, OSHA, for example. So we do have that opportunity to influence change and to have employers' voices heard in the interest of the wider society.
Excellent, Stephanie. Yeah, thank you so much. So critical to, again, see how these interfaces are happening at country level, how organizations like yours are facilitating that dialogue. We're very close to our timeline, but we've been graced with a few moments for one question. John, this one to you from the chat. It says, excuse if you've already explained, what was the driver behind Microsoft opening an office to pursue UN affairs? And what is the long-term ambition of that role for the company? Thank you.
Well, I think we've seen, the issues that we've been working on have been multilateral and multi-stakeholder. And to be honest, when we made this plan, there was at least one major, the United States government wasn't so supportive of multilateral issues. But whether it's on cybersecurity or digital safety or environmental sustainability, areas that we are working deeply in, we believe that multilateral institutions and engagement, inclusive multilateralism with corporate engagement and civil society are incredibly important to our success. And so with that idea, it kind of grew out of the success of the Paris call, the Christchurch call on terrorist content, and our other efforts, as well as our longstanding work with UNHCR on refugee issues over 20 years, our skills work with UNICEF over many years, and UNESCO. And so it's our commitment to supporting multilateral solutions. We believe that there's a tremendous opportunity to bring, to achieve the SDGs by bringing corporate, kind of figuring out how the gears of the corporate world fit with the gears of the multilateral world, multilateral institutions like the United Nations. And so we believe we can help the United Nations be more successful. And really, that's our goal.
Excellent, and we certainly welcome that. I think it's been said before that we really do need strategic alliances to meet the amazing challenges of the goals. And with that, I thank all of the amazing panelists on panel 2. And Shay, I hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and to the panelists. This was a really interesting dialogue. And there have been some questions also raised and about the whole issue of the Global Compact national networks, where in many cases, the IOE employers federations are actually housing and hosting those networks. So at the global level and also at the local level, it's so important that we work together in trying to bring the employers and the private sector together. So now from commitment to action, how do we ensure partnerships between the public and the private sector are solidified to ensure the SDGs are achieved? Who better than to speak about this, the chairman and president of IOE, Earl Gurasepi, and also from the UN side, Brian James Williams. I give the floor to you, Earl, for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Shay. Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues, thank you all who have joined us for this timely and important dialogue as we launch this new publication, Playbook on fostering collaboration between the UN resident coordinators and the private sector, particularly employer organizations. On behalf of my colleagues at the International Organization of Employers, our partners at Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and the UN Development Coordination Office, I would like to express our gratitude to Mrs. Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, for her message as our keynote speaker and all the other distinguished speakers. COVID-19 has set us back. The achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 was already in question before the pandemic, but now we will have to work harder than ever to make them a reality. All crucial stakeholders must join forces, governments, the UN system, employers, workers, and civil society, among others, to contribute their resources, time, expertise, and valuable perspectives to not only recover, but to rebuild better, rebuild sustainably, and achieve the Agenda 2030. Employer organizations, being the representative and legitimate voice of business at the national level, are deeply involved in national policy-making processes and bring with them diverse business perspectives with constituent companies of all sizes and sectors, including SMEs, to bring a more dynamic and nuanced view of the business landscape. We hope that the playbook is helpful to bringing together the resident coordinators and employers who we see as the natural partners for the SDGs. And just as we champion for collaboration, we are practicing what we preach. With our valued partners in this endeavor, KAS, UNDCO, and others, such as the UN Global Compact, we will deepen our collaboration, continue with additional dialogues and knowledge sharing, but also pivot to action. In the coming months, we will explore on the ground efforts in pilot countries to bring together the UN and the private sector to not only regain ground lost to COVID-19, but to tackle systemic challenges as we rebuild for the SDGs. Thank you. Back to you, Shay.
Thank you very much, Earl. And I give the floor to Brian. And we know that we're a little bit over time, but I'm going to give the floor to Brian. And after Brian's intervention, we have a very short video of 3 minutes about the playbook if you would like to stay on for that. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shay. I will be brief. President Kirasepi, Ambassador Mattiolo, distinguished colleagues who have been on this call. Firstly, let me apologize for the absence of Deputy Director of DCO, Rosemary Kalapurakal. She's currently traveling from India to the US, and that's become complicated, as you all know from the news. So I apologize for her absence today. The conversation's really been great. So many good examples, whether it was about the contribution to vaccines in our global crisis, Ambassador Mattiolo, about the convening space of the United Nations, Valerie, about real dialogues benefiting from telecommuting that has happened to us all across Latin America, Christian, engaging in cooperation frameworks from the private sector, Douglas out in Uganda, Microsoft, of course, bringing with it technical wisdom, but also focusing on digital skills of real people. So many wonderful examples today that I hope people can take with them when they go back to work on this Monday for the rest of the week. Let me just make 4 quick points. What I really hope comes out of today is a nudge to resident coordinators, a nudge to business folks of any kind, but especially employers, organizations, and global compact chapters to get together to meet. And I was a resident coordinator before, and one of the lessons I took away is, one meeting is not enough. We need to be honest, we're coming from very different cultures. A public sector culture is different from a business culture. And you got to meet several times. You got to have lots of lunches and really learn about each other and listen before you can get to the point where you can identify common action. So be patient, invest in the relationship, invest in learning and listening, but get out there and meet folks outside of your comfort zone. It's really important. Number 2, policy advocacy and trilateralism. So this was raised by many speakers. It's important that government and business and the UN are all part of this conversation. Some of the examples that are in the playbook that I really liked were where business and the UN got together jointly to do policy advocacy to government. We know that government policy has a huge impact on the structure of markets and therefore on what businesses can do and not do in ways that can help achieve the sustainable development goals, whether it's about labor practice, whether it's about environmental standards, or whether it's about facilitating trade so that you can move stuff more easily and you can make markets more efficient and more effective. Third point, someone did ask about global guidelines, and Valerie mentioned the Global Compact. The Global Compact does have a set of 10 principles. They relate to human rights, they relate to the environment, they relate to labor standards, they relate to anti-corruption practices. There's 10 of those principles out there. The Global Compact is one thing. The IOE is very structured and is in every country. We need to bring these together, togetherness and in solidarity. That's how we can really make a difference. And fourth and last point, it would be great coming out of this to have some pilot countries. So maybe we can think, Shay, through how we can work with the IOE, with the UN, identify some places where we'd really like to see some progress on this partnership and put the playbook into action this year. So congratulations again. Thank you, Konrad Adenauer, for the partnership. Thanks, Shay, for the partnership. Thanks to the ILO, who is critical in the trilateral on behalf of the UN as well. It's been a great event, and I look forward to putting all of this into action. Thanks.
Thank you so much, both Earl and Brian, and particularly the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. They've been a fabulous partner. And I know many of you are asking for a copy of the playbook. And we have put it in the chat. It's also, Amina Mohammed's video is also out there. Tomorrow you will receive a thank you note. Everyone who has registered in that thank you note, you will receive the recording and also a link to the playbook as well. So you will receive it, we guarantee you. And thank you, Brian. Yes, next steps, action, we need to move. There's not enough time left. And we have to move quickly. We are looking at pilots also with the Global Compact, and really to assist in countries where particularly there are not a Global Compact network, but also to reinforce and to work on the ground between the employers and the UN. So thank you very much. But before you leave, if you have the time, we have a very short video that we put together around the playbook. And I leave it to Elodie to put the video up there. Thank you so much.
For us as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, it is important that multilateralism in the 21st century moves beyond mere intergovernmental relations.
The private sector is a crucial partner to achieve the Sustainable Development Objective, the 2030 Agenda.
A recent study by the ILO showed that only 15% of employers' federations are involved in UN country assessment.
Businesses are the motors of economies around the world, and if those economies are going to be transformed in ways to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we need business.
It's not just a source of financing. It's not just a source of funding. It also offers innovation, expertise, technology, skills, diverse perspectives, creativeness.
Who employs people, men and women, so that they can earn decent livelihoods? Who adjusts the way factories work or the way raw materials are obtained so that the environment is protected for generations to come? The answer to these questions is business.
The playbook is based on numerous dialogues that we've had over the last 9 months between UN resident coordinators and employers' federations, a guide to understand the new role and responsibilities of the UN resident coordinators under the new UN reform, but also for the resident coordinators to understand the role that employers' federations, both nationally and globally, that they represent the voice of business of large companies, small companies, globally and nationally.
The first challenge that I think it's important for us to work jointly on is the decent work deficit that we experience in the country.
Uganda is the largest home to refugees in Africa and third in the world, with 1.4 million refugees. As a result, the World Food Programme has had a partnership with Equity Bank, trying to make sure that cash transfers were made available to the refugees and the host communities as part of financial inclusion.
Improving coordination coordination in the interventions that we have had.
We began by making sure that when we were developing the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework for Uganda, that for the first time, the private sector was part of it as partners.
Within a given time frame, then we have to have dialogue which is consistent. That allows us to get the results we want. It's important to have engagement, direct engagement with the resident coordinator.
In the framework of our cooperation with IOE, we will extend the dialogues between UN resident coordinators and the private sectors to Africa and the Asia-Pacific region. Only in this way, we will be able to build back better.
The other lesson I need to put across is the issue of goodwill, to appreciate that we are all working towards the same goals.
Today's challenges require a much more systemic and ambitious change in regulations, in policies. The employers and business organizations are key players to change these policies, to implement them effectively. Let's commit all together, but let's act jointly.
All around the world, UN resident coordinators, employer federations can sit down together, building conditions and finding
Bueno.
I'm sorry, I believe it's been, there was a mix-up and the video did not stop, but it's late. We'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and we will send out the video to you tomorrow as well. So thank you very much. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.